Hey, what's up? Zach here, and today I've got the shoe that Austin Reaves was absolutely going off in the 2023 NBA playoffs, the Rigorer Sniper 2 Pro. Here we go. And even though the Lakers didn't make it to the NBA Finals, there really is no denying how much of a standout Austin Reaves was, and there were a lot of elements in his shoe that I really think complement his game, especially some of the real specific needs that he has on the court and some of the things that he does, and just some of the things he puts his body through on the court. So let's get into it. Came like this close to the microphone. The uppers of the Sniper 2 Pro to me are one of the best parts of the shoe. It is almost like a really thick ripstop material on the very outer shell, a little nylon type material. Then underneath of that is more of a textile layer, but it is this 2 layers of mesh kind of separated by a little bit of an air gap layer. Now, the one thing I don't like about the Rigorer Sniper 2 Pro is the tongue. Let's take this away here. If you look, there's this little bubble in the top of the tongue here. Now, I found that if you lace on it, it does give you a little bit of annoyance until it kind of almost like breaks down. So I guess you could just put a little bit of a knife in there and pop the bubble, make it a little more comfortable, or just lace around it. But speaking of lacing, you know, the lace line is offset on these things. Plus you're getting a 2-layer lace eyelet closure system, one just integrated into the shoe, but then you get the looped eyelets here going into the strobel board on both the medial and lateral side, which gives it quite a bit better lockdown and almost a better feeling of containment when you're really pushing the shoe to its edges, which we'll talk about in the playability section. But if you look at these on the breathability test, they heated up 148.1 degrees, cooled down another 74.7. What I noticed is unlike some other shoes, you know, the tongue on these wasn't breathing all that exceptionally well, even though it is a little bit thinner, but all that kind of faux ripstop material around the medial side as well as on the dorsal and lateral side were just breathing like crazy. I couldn't really feel any heat coming out of that small little target hole in here. It might be just a little too small for that. You know, even though it is a lighter upper material and pretty breathable for how, you know, more maximalist of a shoe is, it does still retain a ton of containment in the uppers. And on the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, I mean, I really thought the burr was just gonna rip right through this kind of molded upper layer. However, it doesn't. And then on the area where it does get to the nylon, it doesn't get through that either. So this is a little bit tougher of a material, I think, than people would think it is. I think as long as you're not dragging on really gritty asphalt and concrete, especially on hardwood, I think you're just fine. And looking at the midsole and the teardown, I was really curious because I did the bounce height test first, and I was getting these like really high readings on the bounce height test, and you know, the air sac technology is basically eTPU. It's almost like Boost, but you know, when I actually tore it open, you can actually feel it. It's a lot fluffier than Boost. That's really the only way I can describe it, is very fluffy. And they've got this pod of it here in the back as well as in the forefoot. And I think that's why if you look at the bounce height test on these, speaking of, 39 centimeters in the heel, 39.5 in the forefoot. And typically a lot of those eTPU type foams, some of them are more shock absorbing than they are returning of energy. And in these, you really do get a lot of bounce out of them. Now this is carried here by a very cookie dough type feeling. It does feel like just an EVA carrier around the shoe, but it is kind of more dense foam. And I like that because you're getting, like I said, the pillowiness or the fluffiness of the air sac, but then you're also getting a little bit more of the dense support and shock absorbing of the carrier foam. Now, if you look at the shank on this, this is a dual shank. One pretty thick top-loaded TPU shank, but then a really broad carbon fiber shank on the bottom. Now it looks like it's really big and gives a lot of support. However, when I was tearing this down, and I was talking about this in the members only video, like I said, if you want to see all these teardowns early and extended, make sure you check out the member section. But when I was talking about that, I was kind of cutting through that pretty easily, and I was popping it pretty easy, a lot easier than some other carbon fiber shanks that I've done recently, especially like thinking like the LeBron, some of the Way of Ways were really hard to get through. This one cracked a little easier than those. So I'm not sure that carbon fiber shank is doing a ton in terms of the cantilevering or diving board effect on these. I think it's more the really robust TPU shank, but having that molded shank on the bottom there, which is that lightweight carbon fiber, plus the top-loaded shank of TPU, it is still a dual shank. It is still 2 shanks working for your foot and giving you just a little bit more return on investment every time you come through your gait cycle. So even though it's not the stiffest carbon fiber out there, it does still keep the shoe feeling a little bit more agreeable, a little more forgiving versus maybe something that's a super stiff carbon fiber. Sniper. But the most intriguing part of the Sniper 2s, at least to me with the outsole tread, are a real hodgepodge of patterns. You've got two pretty wide set pivot points, one under the big toe joint, then one under the heel. The tread's actually pretty far spread apart, so you are actually getting grip on there as well as surface area contact. And you have all linear treads going up here into the medial forefoot, and then basically what looks like a trail running type tread going on the entire lateral forefoot, just more nubs, but more nubs in like rectangular orientation, almost kind of like either a trail running shoe or even maybe a grass court tennis shoe, but that are rectangular, which is pretty interesting. Now, I found grip on these to be pretty fluid, which to me means that it wasn't the craziest, most tacky grip, never gave out either, but it allowed easy flow from step to step. I feel like I could stop, pivot, and then move again very easy. The shoe wasn't like sticking to the ground. It also wasn't giving out on me either. I didn't feel like I was gonna hyperextend a knee or something. It really easy like transition from step to step, almost like the Mellow shoes, which is really easy moving. However, with these, still a pretty sharp lateral flange, but unlike some shoes where it comes to a point, this lateral flange goes all the way from kind of like your midfoot all the way up here into the forefoot. So you're not getting as wide of a flange, but you are getting a longer flange, which I think gives you just as much stability without having that real wide set base in your forefoot. So it's a little bit easier fluid step to step like I was talking about in the tread. So that's two F words, fluffy and fluid. And speaking of all that fluidity, all that fluid fluffiness or fluffy fluidness, if you look at the speed ratio on these, they come in at a 2.41, which is pretty darn good for a more maximalist shoe, as well as, I mean, the shoe is pretty decent for straight line speed as well as side to side speed with that longer flange versus real wide and bulky lateral flange. So I think if you're trying to catch speed going side to side or more catch quickness going side to side or speed going from coast to coast, I think these have you covered. But the one thing you want to watch out for on the outsole tread is its durability. If you look at the outsole durability test, 10 seconds, highest grit sandpaper, I mean, a solid millimeter of damage on this. The interesting thing is, on a macro scale, the tread depth is actually pretty deep throughout the entire rows, but on the individual features of the tread, like these little rectangular nubs, their depth really isn't anything. The burr just wiped it right out. It's about a millimeter. So, the durometer isn't the highest in the world. I think if you keep them on hardwood, there's enough tread on there. Like I said, the macro tread depth is enough that you'll keep pretty okay durability on these. But as an outdoor shoe, you might just want to look at something with either a harder durometer or a wider tread pattern. So getting into the fit of the Sniper 2 Pro, these do fit long and wide. They remind me a lot of the 361 AG3, where they just kind of fit big in all categories. If you're a narrow foot, probably would be going down a size. If you're a medium foot, probably down a half size. A 2E, you can stay at your true size. Same with a 4E. If you're a 2E and want a real one-to-one performance fit, you might actually be able to go down a half size on these. But if you really suffer from cramping a lot, maybe just keep it at a true to size, wear a thicker sock, or put a little bit more bigger insert in there. The one thing I'll say about kind of snake bites on the foot or a little pains you might be having, these do have really good forefoot support as well as heel support, because you're getting the soft heel pad in those with that air sac, but you're also getting a little bit more of the supportive or more dense foam around it. So you're not getting all that micro motion or inversion, eversion in the heel either, whereas a lot of shoes people think that are real soft and cushy, right, are going to be good, but it allows so much motion that you get strain in your plantar fascia or your Achilles tendon. Whereas a lot of times you want something that's a little bit more firm so that you don't go side to side, but not so firm you feel like you're on a rock. So it's a real tightrope, you're kind of walking there, but on these it's nice. The one thing is that the offset laces, which I do love, but they offset medial, which means that you really do have to lock these down pretty good to keep the instability out medially. So if you're someone that's a super overpronator, just make sure that you're paying attention to locking down the shoes, maybe putting a bubble lace in these just to keep the lockdown really good. As long as they're tied down and stay tied down well, there's really not a problem. For pivoting power, just make sure that you're lacing these pretty one-to-one with your foot. But when you look at the playing characteristics of the Sniper 2 Pro, at least for me, I really saw why these were such a good match for Austin Reaves. And when I was kind of going deeper into his game, I was watching a lot of him in the playoffs, obviously, but when I kind of started looking at his playing style, he is sometimes pretty clunky, pretty mechanical on court, but the end result of a lot of his finishes are that of someone a lot more fluid, a lot more shifty on court. He has that footwork of a large, lumbering, power power forward, but the finishes of a really flashy guard. It's a really interesting mashup of playing styles and skill sets. I mean, especially because, the ball is finding the hoop, more times than it is not, especially when he's off balance or when he's fallen away or when 3 guys are just pummeling him to the ground. And I think the Sniper 2 Pro complements that, number one, because it is so forgiving in the midsole. I think, especially for him, he is crash landing quite a bit. I mean, he puts himself into harm's way to get the ball into the hoop, a lot more than some other people would. He really sacrifices himself in that way. And I think, especially with the heel pad and then a forefoot, I think you can get a little bit more forgiving pop off of his forefoot, especially when he's trying to go for a floater or when he only has 1 foot to push off from, when he's kind of in the real compromised position or falling backward. And I also think the shoe just being a little bit more substantial on that flange and how long it is. I think with him being a little more lanky and him taking a little bit longer steps, I think he needs a flange on his shoe that's a little bit longer. He doesn't necessarily need one that comes to a real sharp point for someone that's getting really down low and getting really shifty with their footwork. For him, he's lumbering to the basket and then all of a sudden he's putting on the flash once he's in the air. So I think something that's a little bit more nimble for somebody his size and with his type of footwork is really a perfect match. And I think if you're someone that plays like that too, I think these could be a perfect match for you as well. And especially since Austin Reaves has gotten a lot more attention this year, I think his shoes are going to start getting a lot more attention too. So I'd love to know, if you are looking to pick up a pair of these. I think I got mine for 110 bucks from their actual, the Rigorer's website. So I think for the price point and the right player, I do think you are kind of getting a good product here. So I'd love to know your thoughts as well down below. And the shoe that I kept thinking of when I had this on my foot was the Nike GT Jump or the upcoming GT Jump 2. They do seem like they fit kind of the same profile. They just go about accomplishing the same goal in different ways. So if you do want to see my teardown of the Nike GT Jump, I will leave that linked up above and make sure you subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. See you in the next one.